It's almost about that time. Right about now.
Right about now. Funk, bunk, bunk. Bunk, soul, brother.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to the Right About Now podcast. I'm your host, John Small. Well, how are you doing? I hope you are settling in to 2024. It is a bit of a crazy time in the media business right now. And we are going to have an episode coming up soon talking about all the layoffs and all the changes. It's just nuts. If you are in media, writing, content creation, there is definitely an adjustment happening right now that is being felt by everyone. Pretty much everyone I know that is a content creator, from television to magazines to websites. So, woof. So here's a career not taken. I don't know if there's any shortage of serial killer profilers, but my guest is one of the best in the business. She's one of the first in the business. Her name is Jana Monroe. And she was actually the first female FBI agent to win a coveted spot with the agency's Behavioral Sciences Unit, which is also known as BSU. Any of you who have watched Mindhunters on Netflix are very familiar with BSU. And Jana has profiled serial, mass, and spree killers for local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies for years. She is the person who provided Jodie Foster with the insights about in the film Silence of the Lambs. Jodie understand what it means to be in the FBI, to be an FBI trainee, to understand what it would be like to work with a serial killer such as Hannibal Lecter. So Jana has a new book out. It is called Hearts of Darkness, which takes the readers inside her extraordinary career, which, as I mentioned, was with the BSU. Before retiring from the FBI in 2006, she oversaw the Bureau's Los Angeles and Phoenix offices. She also served as the first assistant director of the Cyber Crimes Unit. And these days, she's working in the private sector. So we see them all the time on TV, these FBI agents. But it's not every day you get to talk to a real-life FBI agent who has met some of the worst serial killers known to mankind. So I had to jump on this opportunity. I was all over this. In our interview, we talk about her background and what led her to getting into this line of work. We talk about what she's learned meeting some of the most heinous killers. We talk about why she does what she does. And of course, what it was like to work with Jodie Foster, and in contrast, Demi Moore, which wasn't as great an experience as you will find out. I am excited to share this interview with you. So interesting. So without further ado, I bring you Jana Monroe. Jana Monroe, welcome to the Right About Now podcast.
Oh, thank you so much. It's my pleasure to be here.
I'm so glad to have you. I mean, it's not every day you get to talk to an FBI legend, and really enjoyed reading your book and understanding more about what you do. I think before we kind of launch into your amazing career, I wanted to get a little bit of a sense of your upbringing and how you got this strong interest in law enforcement. So tell us a little bit about, we were just talking before we got on camera that you grew up in Long Beach, but your dad had an interesting job, right? That influenced, I guess, somewhat what you would end up doing with your career.
Yeah, I guess you could say it was interesting. My dad was a projectionist, and it was back in the days when you had double features, movies. And he would, his babysitting duties once in a while, actually at least once a week, were for me. I went to the show with him. I went to work with him. And a lot of times it was a large theater in Long Beach, and I would be in the balcony all by myself. It was great. I'd take popcorn and a jug of iced tea and watch double features. And I was, at that time, it's the Clint Eastwood spaghetti westerns, as they referred to. Dirty Harry specifically. Well, Dirty Harry came later. That was not part of the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. But I was influenced by them in that it was always like the good guys and the bad guys. And I think that really tied into a passion that I had about, I love this country and that we're a nation of laws and liberties. And I wanted to be a part of protecting that equilibrium. And I hate bullies. I hate people who take advantage of others. And it seemed like I knew I couldn't be a cowgirl. So it's like, how could I serve both of those callings? And it seemed like law enforcement.
Yeah. So this is a time when maybe, women getting into law enforcement wasn't wasn't as frequent as it is now. How did you sort of take the steps to get involved in law enforcement later in your life?
Yeah, I think, and that was actually kind of an understatement. Not were they not involved in law enforcement, they weren't welcome.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying you have to go back to that time frame. There was definitely no welcome wagon because the culture and that generation thought that women couldn't do the job the way that they had it envisioned. But what I did is in high school, and then when I was first starting college, I wanted to look at what kind of courses I should take that would make me more competitive, right? To get into law enforcement, and how could I prepare for that? And one of my rude awakenings was I went to a job fair, and they had the booths there with the different careers. And this nice FBI guy, well, actually, he turned out not to be so nice because when I went up to ask him, what do I need to do? What courses should I take in college? And he goes, well, you're not qualified. I said, that's why I'm going to college. And he said, well, no, you can be a file clerk, or what the F refers to as a rotor clerk, or a secretary, but you can never be an agent.
Now, what year is this? Are we talking late 70s here?
Actually, this was in 1973. And so what I did was I took law enforcement, criminal justice, criminology, as they call it, as my major in college. But I joined the police department in Chino, California, because police were ahead of the federal agencies at that time, and they were hiring women.
So they were hiring women. So you took a job in Chino. I think you had one, I was reading your book, you had one sort of formative experience during that time that really kind of awakened you to, that this is not going to be maybe as glamorous as it was, in the movies.
Yes, John, that's a good word, glamorous. There wasn't a whole lot that was glamorous in there, but when I got off what I referred to my training wheels, right? So I didn't have a training officer anymore, and I'm alone, and I got a call that there was a big traffic jam in Central Avenue, and a cow was blocking all the traffic. Mm-hmm. Well, when I got there, here's this cow, calm as could be, and honk, horns are honking, blaring, didn't affect her. I realized they didn't teach us that in the academy. How do you remove a cow from its feet? So after several failed attempts, I had to call for backup, and I did not live that down. That not only was I the only woman there, I also didn't know how to remove a cow. So,
well, they don't teach you that. They didn't teach you that in the academy. No cow removal.
No.
You also saw a traffic accident, right? Sort of a brutal traffic accident.
Yes, yeah, and that talk about not glamorous. And that had such a deep impact, and I think it would on most, where you look at something that happens that quickly, and here's a whole family, and I'm one of the first responders to the scene, and without getting overly graphic, I mean, there was brain matter, and it was quite a high impact, and for me, just realizing what that was really literally made me nauseous.
Yeah.
Made me sick.
Well, how did you deal with that? Was there a moment when you said, I don't want to, maybe this isn't the right job for me?
No, I never fluctuated, but to your point, I still wanted to do the job, but I thought, what's going out the window is all the stuff I saw in the movies.
Yeah.
I don't think those parts are going to arrive. You're going to get a different type of satisfaction, and that's addressing the calling and altruistically helping people, those kinds of things. But the glamour and the quote unquote, badass part that can look glamorous in the movies, didn't really exist.
So how did you get into the FBI? Your first try, they said no, but you eventually ended up in the FBI. So tell me a little bit about your journey back into the good graces, I guess, of the FBI.
Yeah. So I actually waited a little bit longer to join the FBI because I was in the probation department, then the police department. But I was getting a lot of good experience, and I really enjoyed what I was doing. But then, it's just one of those moments, okay, I'm ready now. And I'm kind of a gypsy at heart. And I knew once you join the FBI, you're going to go somewhere else. They're going to move you somewhere else. So that was actually appealing to me at the time.
So they allowed you to join once you had your police experience under your belt.
Right. Yes, it's quite a process to apply for the Bureau because they have a myriad of tests. And I think they do this deliberately. It's not convenient. You don't get to do all the tests in one day. You have to come back each time. So there's a written test, an interview, a physical test, firearms test, psychological test. So you go back quite a few times to take all of these. It took me a little over a year. And I think at that time, the average processing time to get them was about 18 months. Right. So it's not like corporate jobs where you go, when you interview and if you get it, you start in 2 weeks or something.
What do you think they're looking for and not looking for? I mean, you're a profiling expert. What is it that they're screening for?
A lot of things. I think one of them specifically is ethics. Do you have that good internal moral compass? Another, dedication, and I'm saying dedication to this country. And the work, the hours can be, you can work, a 10-hour day and think you're going home, and then at 2 a.m. get a call on something. So they're certainly not your normal type of hours. And it's going to have that dedication to realize that it's duty first. So they're looking for that. And they're looking for people who are intelligent and not so much from an academic IQ scale. I think I don't believe too much in those scales. So I guess I'm a little biased,
right.
But it's more like situational awareness.
Street smarts. Literally street smart.
Absolutely. Literally street smart. Yes.
Yeah. Interesting. So one of I guess the first place they put you, and you said like you're a nomad, a gypsy, they put you in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Yes.
What were some of the job duties out in Albuquerque for you?
The first thing was kind of funny when you go to the academy and it's like the Academy Awards. So when you get your office, you go up in front of the whole class and open up an envelope, and I'm going to,
and you're like, please, LA. Oh yeah. I don't know where you want to go. Miami.
Yeah. I'm an LA girl. I wanted to go back to the big city. And I'm looking at, embarrassingly, fortunately, I didn't say it out loud. I'd never seen Albuquerque written. And I'm going, Albuquerque.
I know. That is, I was spelling it out for this question. I was like, I couldn't even, the spell check just kicked in immediately. How does anybody spell that word? Okay.
Yeah, I've got 39 people looking at me, right? I'm like, okay, don't say it out loud till you know what it is. But so Gallup, New Mexico is one of the resident agencies there, and it's not a really nice place. And the reason is it's Native American. There are tribes there. That's not the reason, but unfortunately, a lot of the crimes at that time and today involve alcohol. There was some incest. There was a lot of homicide cases, and so I was assigned there for a while. And to kind of add, insult to injury. The tribe did not recognize a female, a woman, as being in charge of anything. So a lot of the times when I was conducting interviews, I would need to bring a male counterpart along just to get their attention.
That's tricky. We will get right back to the interview, but before we do, I wanted to tell you about a very special class that I am offering on February 18th. It's called Proven Formulas for Writing Stories That Sell. It is a 3-hour class, and I am offering it online so you can take it anywhere you may be in the world. I don't do this very often. So now we've got about 10 spots left in this class. So I wanted to get the word out to my listeners before anybody else. And in this class, you will learn everything you need to know to write an article for a magazine, a website, a blog, a newsletter, content marketing, whatever platform will pay you for your work. We'll learn about the different types of articles you can write. We'll learn about how to come up with topics, finding experts and subjects for your stories, how to interview those experts and subjects, the 4 parts of every story that you must know. We'll dive into SEO optimization, writing clicky headlines, fact-checking, how to pitch your story, and how to be a writer that editors want to work with. Those are just some of the topics we will be covering. I will also be opening it up for Q&A, so you can ask me all sorts of questions. I'm so excited to see your smiling face on February 18th. I will leave the information about how to sign up for the class in the description, but you can go to pandemicuniversity.com. I'm right there on the homepage. You sign up right there. They'll send you an invitation and you are good to go. All right, let's get back to the conversation. So you had this interest in profiling and human behavior. First of all, let's talk about what that is and why that interested you so much.
Well, I think human behavior, right? I think a lot of people are interested in that. You say, okay, you're a human being, and look at the spectrum of us, right?
Yeah.
A human being, yeah, you can go from 0 to 10 and still be a human being. It's like, my gosh. So that was of interest to me. And I had minored in psychology, but I got interested in the really aberrant behavior. And I think that still stands today. People are compelled and repulsed by the same thing. When you look at serial killers or a single homicide with pathology indicated, meaning there's post-mortem activity, evisceration, decapitation. You don't have to do all of that if you want to kill someone. So it's that involvement and activity with that became fascinating to me. And I wanted to learn more. And then again, altruistically, I thought maybe I could add some value to these types of people that are out there and help solving some of these crimes to give closure. You can't ever bring someone back. And so when you say justice and closure, I think we don't really have the words for that, but that's all we have. But to help bring closure to the too many victims of these crimes.
So you were interested in really answering why do people engage in abhorrent behavior? Abhorrent, I guess abhorrent is the word. Abhorrent behavior.
Yeah, aberrant is abnormal, and abhorrent is horrible.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're right on both counts.
Right. And also, and sort of how to determine, I guess, what they might do next, right? As a serial killer, like if they are somebody who thinks this way, trying to figure out, where they might strike next or what they might do next, right? So you can sort of catch them.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. The number one thing in all crimes is motive, right? Mm-hmm. Why did the person do it? Why did they steal something? Why did they kill? Some of it's pretty obvious. People steal because they want money. But some of the others are, why would you kill someone, have sexual activity with them after decomposition? Why would you continue to abduct people? Those kinds of things are still a mystery to us. We have a better sense, but I think as human beings, we can't truly understand that.
No, it's amazing that there are patterns. It just all seems so random and just evil, right? But the fact that there are certain patterns and indicators that this behavior might arise in someone. Talk to us about the transition from working in Albuquerque to getting this nod to work for the behavioral science unit in Quantico.
Well, I had a stop along the way. I was in the Tampa division for several years. And that's where I became a coordinator. They called it the National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crime Coordinator. And that was for cases that the locals had that had gone cold or they could not resolve. So they requested the help of science unit at Quantico, Virginia. So by being that coordinator, I got to know a lot of the guys. And I say guys because there were only guys there.
Yeah.
And so I worked really hard. And that was after my day work. That was considered an addendum to my day work.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I was happy to do it because I was learning.
So what did that entail? Like talk a little bit about what the extracurricular activity was exactly.
For example, there's let's just say a triple homicide case, and the local police officers working it, they're putting all their evidence together, and they still haven't resolved it after a period of time. Certainly don't want a case like that to go cold, meaning that we don't have any leads, so we'll just shelve it over here. So once they have exhausted their leads, they request help from the FBI. Like in that case, maybe offender, they don't know who did it. So offender traits and characteristics. So as a coordinator, what I would do is box up all of the evidence that the profiler in Quantico would need. So that would, the case files, the photographs, any kind of victimology. So any kind of forensics that they have that get to help solve this case.
Right About Now is sponsored by AG1 by Athletic Greens. I drink AG1 twice a day, once in the morning and once at night. And I have to say, it has really become a part of my daily routine. I love knowing that I'm giving my body all the healthy vitamins and nutrients it needs every day. So I'm not stress eating, or I'm not taking a fistful of vitamins that cost an astronomical amount at whole paycheck. And I love that it's an all-in-one drink. And it tastes really good too. I mix it in coconut water. My daughter puts it in just plain water. Unfortunately, she drinks so much of it that I run out too frequently. If you use my special code, you will get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D3, K2, and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first purchase. You go to drinkag1.com/rightaboutnow, WRITE. That's drinkag1.com/rightaboutnow. Check it out. Do you remember a time when you kind of came in and with your expertise were able to help the local police help solve a case?
Yeah, I think one of the most memorable ones, because it's the only one I got to see from beginning to end, was the Rogers case. And it was a mother and 2 daughters that were brutally killed in Tampa. And they were assaulted and then had duct tape put over their mouths and 55-pound cinder blocks hogtied and thrown into Tampa Bay. And all that's horrible. But from the autopsy, they were thrown in alive. So they had water in their lungs. But anyway, that particular case had gone cold, and that really negatively impacted the tourism business in not only Tampa, but Florida, because it was a very high-profile case. So the investigators came back to Quantico, and we started from, scratch, right? Okay, they brought all the evidence. What are we missing? And there was a little handwritten note that was from the hotel to a brief drive over to the dock. And that's where they had gotten into a boat of the offenders. So I said, who wrote that note? And they said, Joan Rogers. I said, how do you know that? And it was just quiet. I said, how do you know that? So nobody did. So they took it to the husband and father of all the deceased and said, is this your wife's handwriting? He said, no, absolutely not. So what we did was blow up the handwriting on billboards. This is before the internet. This would be a great internet case.
Yeah.
But the billboards on a very busy street in Tampa with his handwriting, and within 48 hours, we had several people all giving the same name. The reason was this guy was in his own aluminum siding business for outdoor patios, which you have to have screened-in patios in Florida or they'll eat you alive.
Yeah, the bugs.
But yes, apparently he did really shoddy work, and he was in small claims court with a bunch of different people. And he was a prolific writer, and he wrote nasty things back to him. So everybody was angered by him, and they were very familiar with his handwriting.
Oh, wow. He dotted his I's in a certain way. That's crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. And who knew that would do it? He'd have 2 and 3 pages of a response that was, telling him why he wasn't going to pay them or refund them. So, of course, they were angered.
Amazing. So let's talk about the behavioral science unit. So up until this point, or up in our story so far that you're telling, you were kind of doing it as a side or kind of on as an extra thing. How do you get the nod to sort of be in the real behavioral science unit?
Well, it was interesting because it was word of mouth. They did post the job out there. There's an FBI job post. But because I knew several of the agents in the unit, they gave me a call like on a Tuesday, Monday during the week, and said, you better come down tomorrow because the position's up, and interview. So I did. And I had an interview with the unit chief and another agent. And it was an interesting interview. Some of the things I said in the interview, I now tell people not to say during an interview if you'd really like to be hired. But to the credit of the unit chief, he hired me anyway. That thing was, it was a normal interview initially, like, what do you bring to the table? Why do you want to do this? Why are you qualified? Then they pushed 5 pictures, about 8 by 10, very gruesome, grisly looking photos of dead female victims, and didn't ask me any questions. So I'm looking at them, became uncomfortable. I said, well, you're not asking me anything. What do you want me to do? And they said, we wanted to make sure you're not going to faint. You're not nauseous, any of those things. And I said, well, why would I be? I've worked on these kinds of cases. I was a probation and a police officer. And I said, I took the liberty of looking you up. And this is the unit chief. And I said, you were a tennis instructor in the military before coming in. So why would you be more qualified than I?
Touche.
Again, then I realized, that's not a good thing to say to your potential boss.
Yes, anybody who's listening to this who's trying to get interview tips, that is not,
Yeah, that's a no. That's a no.
That's a no. But it's interesting. What is it about, you think, and again, maybe it's just the fact that you've been exposed to so much of these horrible images that you were able, by that time in your career, unlike the traffic accident earlier in your career, you were able to really like handle seeing it. But are you able to like compartmentalize it, or how are you able to look at those images and not get very upset?
See, and I think that's another great word. Words. Compartmentalize.
Right about now we learn about. I always wonder. Yeah,
it all fits in, Jonathan. That's great. Yeah, compartmentalize. And then also I refer to it as a clinical detachment. And I would make that analogous to a doctor. I'm not my skill set, but doctors have to deliver bad news a lot of times. If they got, emotionally involved with all of their patients, they wouldn't be doing a very good job. So you have to have that detachment. And I referred to the cases as like case number 572A. Rarely would I use their names. Interesting.
Well, I'm going to make an interesting leap here, and I'm obviously not comparing you to the people you profile and the horrible people, but I wonder if they have a similar ability, right? Are they, these people who do these horrible things, are they able to sort of compartmentalize their actions? Because I always try to wonder, like, how could somebody do something so heinous? They must disassociate in some way, right? I mean, in some cases.
I totally agree with you, but you look at the majority of them are sociopaths, right? Meaning they can't feel or sense remorse or guilt like we do.
Interesting.
So that's where it's hard because, we'd be like, oh my God, I can't imagine doing that. Well, good. I'm glad you can't. But when I would speak with them, definitely they compartmentalized it. And would often say, oh, you think that's bad. When I hadn't made any judgment, I tried diligently, not facially, behaviorally, verbally, not make any judgments. But they would say, well, so-and-so did this, or I saw. They would make it like, there's something much worse out there than what I did.
Interesting. Why do they do that, you think?
Well, to me, they know that. And again, so many of them are smart. It would be great to think that they're not smart and they have three eyes and a way to identify them. That isn't it. But they assume, because they know very well what they did was wrong. Like, oh, gee, I'm not supposed to kill people and then eat them afterwards. I didn't realize that. No, they know. And so most of them had been, obviously interviewed during the part of the crime. So it's a way of minimizing what they did. I think it's a way of,
explaining just it away. Right. So it's not.
All of the interviews that I have done, and you're right, the question is the why. And even when they're attempting to be introspective, like why they did it, to me, it sounds like they're parroting something out of a psychology book. I don't really think they know.
Right.
I really don't think they know. So you get a kind of a combination or a conflation of, well, I had a bad upbringing, or like in Ted Bundy's case, he said, well, I looked at pornography at an early age. Well, I know a lot of people who did, and they don't become prolific serial killers.
That's so interesting. So we want answers. We want logical explanations. But if people don't act like normal human beings, it's very hard to find patterns, right? Like you said, they're sociopaths. So what does that mean exactly? They don't have the empathy.
Or remorse.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or empathy. That's correct. So we as human beings, and I mentioned earlier about that moral compass that the FBI was looking for, is if you're doing something wrong, that's how come those kind of people you can use a lie detector, a polygraph with them, because it's like, oh, I know I shouldn't have done that. And even if you aren't showing it, you will have a chemical response to that. People without a conscience don't have that. They really don't, but they're so smart. They learn that verbally, it might get them some brownie points or something. And they say, oh yes, I'm sorry I did that. I know I should not have.
So when you're working at the BSU, and I'm so influenced by Mindhunters because I don't know, that's another television show. Of course, all my education is through watching television shows, like most people's probably, about the FBI. I don't know how accurate that show is, and that, of course, is early days of FBI, but early days of BSU. But the idea that they would go and meet with serial killers and interview them to sort of understand them, is that something that you would do frequently?
Yes, and Mindhunters that is a show by John Douglas and Mark Olshaker, and John Douglas was my boss.
Yeah,
He's the
that's
one
amazing. Yeah, so you know
yeah,
this
that
show.
interviewed me. Yeah, so I was there at that time.
Oh,
and
okay.
that's-
So you were definitely
Yeah.
there. You weren't the female lead in that show, but you were definitely around. They didn't mention you when they should have, because they tried to make it all. It was a bunch of. It was a boys' club though. You were really one of the only. Were you like the only woman around?
Yeah, I was the only one. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. And that's why when Silence of the Lambs, when they came to film that, I was coaching Jodie Foster because the role of Clarice Starling was pretty much me and what I had done. And even though she was a trainee and not a real agent, she hadn't graduated yet, they did that because they really wanted to showcase Quantico.
Before we get to the Jodie Foster story, because that's really interesting when Hollywood kind of comes to your door, I do want to talk about kind of what the day-to-day activities were and about you meeting and talking to these monsters. Was there anybody that stood out to you as like, wow, this is a scary person?
Edmund Kemper.
Mm-hmm.
Edmund Kemper as a serial killer. And if you are familiar with his crimes, the fact that he killed both his grandmother and grandfather, with whom he was living at the time, when he was only 15 years old, and he did it to see what it was like.
Right.
So, yeah. And because, again, we talk about IQ tests, I don't put a lot of faith in them. However, he was tested various times, and he was 160 or 180 on that. So he was certainly a bright person, but extremely sociopathic.
And how did that manifest, aside from what he did actually as a serial killer? When you were in the room with him, what was the vibe sort of like? Creepy?
Well, he had creepy. That's a great word too. Creepy. And it's like he has that no inflection, no intonation in the voice. And kind of like, I think Anthony Hopkins did a fabulous job of Dr. Hannibal Lecter, but you don't blink very much. And it's a looking through you while looking at you. And most people, we're all different. People blink a little bit. And as you're speaking to them, there's some acknowledgement of what you're saying.
Right.
None of that. It was none of that. And so there was no way to relate.
It's interesting. So, you'll meet people like that occasionally. I mean, they're never fun, but you don't, necessarily think, oh, this person is going to become a mass murderer. I wonder what it is that makes them cross over to the dark side, right? Like some people just don't have those human characteristics. Maybe they're not born with them or whatever. Was that something that you were charged with figuring out, like what signs to look for that where somebody's going to cross over?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And what you're talking about, I think, you said you meet people and some of that, that's your little inner voice, the hairs on the back of your neck, whatever you want to call that. We all have it, but to some degree. But I think when you learn the generic you learn to hone in on that, it's an extremely valuable tool. And to your point, just because you're picking up on some of these signs, these indicators, that doesn't mean this person's going to all of a sudden become a killer, but it is something to pay attention to. It's aberrant. And it could mean, you want to look a little deeper into what this person has done or is doing.
Have you ever just in your daily life, like, being at the hardware store and somebody's helping you and it's like, whoa, this person reminds me of Ed Kemper, like, yeah, he's working in the stock room, but this guy, somebody's got to keep an eye on this guy.
Yeah. Do you have a relative? Yeah. But no, absolutely. I have. I mean, unfortunately, not frequently. Yeah. But yeah, there have been some people that I'm like, wow, I would definitely pay attention to. I would not hire this person.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes when my kids were younger, like there's certain friends they would have and I'd be like, whoa, this kid there's something up here. Yeah. And that kind of, you worry, later, it's almost a cliche, but early signs or things that might've happened to them in their childhood. One of them is that they have a lot of times people who become serial killers have a kind of tormented or bad relationship with their mothers. Is that something, is that a stereotype or is that something that you did find in your research?
It's a generalization, but if I were to get into statistics, which I also think can certainly be editorialized, more often than not, yes, more often than not. And not just with their mothers, but just a bad childhood, a bad upbringing. Yeah.
And that's, and the reason that I'm just making a logical connection here, but is because they weren't taught early in their life sort of how to be normal, functioning, empathic, caring kids by their parents and they sort of had to, I don't know, like, why would that bad relationship then result into somebody being evil later on?
Well, I think what you're touching on, and it's that age-old question, nature or nurture.
Yeah.
And I think it's a combination. People learn a lot by role models, not so much as being, again, what people do versus what they say. And it's great if they're all aligned. But I think they didn't have any kind of a positive role model. But again, we know lots of people who didn't, and they don't turn out that way. So I do think it's a combination. I think they were born with something wrong at that particular point. And then you exacerbate that with that kind of an upbringing and no role model and no guidance. And I think that's where things go terribly awry at an early age.
Yeah. So it's seems like it's a little bit of nature and nurture.
Yes, I would say so.
Yeah.
And that's why you see so many of them. There's an exception, like with active shooter, which I won't get into, but that's, a whole other phenomenon. It's a different type of mass killer or shooting, different motivation. But when you look at that, that's typically all of these are younger males. You don't see somebody starting this activity at 60, 70 years old. So it's a combination of a lot of different urges and energies that you'll see in your younger years.
What is some other things that you find with people who perform mass murders, people who commit mass murders? What is a sort of psychological trait or some sort of behavioral trait that is common?
Well, you'll see that, again, it starts at an earlier age, and we used to call it the triad, right, of the enuresis, fire setting, and cruelty to animals. So bedwetting, bedwetting when you're still 11, 12, 13 years old, cruel to animals at an early age and actually enjoying being cruel to animals. And then you see a lot of, I don't want to call them pyromaniacs, but fire setting, kids that are just totally fascinated with it and caught, the house drapes on fire, some have burned the house down. Those kinds of things you find when you look back at serial killers, you'll find that a lot of that has been in their early childhood, those types of signs.
Let me just get into it. So the first one, bedwetting, what would that mean? Like, why would that connect with serial killers?
Well, I think when you're looking at the bedwetting, again, there is a typical age, right? When you're kind of weaned from that within certain limits. This one is, they don't have the control that they want. And that's usually the number one reason for them killing. When you think a lot of it is the sexual component, it's actually control.
It's control.
And they don't have that themselves. So
they're ashamed.
Over somebody else becomes important.
And I see that, yes, with being horrible to animals would be like a sort of being able to control something that's much, less that you can take control over.
That bully thing again, right?
Yeah.
So they start with animals. I had one, a boy as little, he was only 7 years old and had done some really atrocious things to animals. And when I was talking to him about it, he said, because it's really fun.
It's just so twisted. All right, let's switching gears to Jodie Foster.
Okay.
Because it's interesting. I was talking to a relative of mine who is a forensic psychiatrist and works with the FBI. And she was saying, a lot of people in the FBI claim to have been the, inspiration for Clarice. But you actually were, you really were. Tell me about Jodie Foster coming by and how that kind of came about. Is it because you were really the only woman and so she wanted to talk to a woman to prepare for the role in Silence of the Lambs?
Well, the whole crew obviously came down there. And I say down because that's when we were the BSU. We were 2 floors below the gun vault in what used to be J. Edgar Hoover's bomb shelter that they converted to our offices.
That's wild.
Yes. So, I was the only female there. And Jodie Foster, she was so professional and so prepared. So, she knew the script, but she would ask me things like, it says in here, I would say this, or I would ask this. She goes, would you really do that? And I had no influence over them, but she sure did. So some of the nuanced things that just made it that much more genuine is what we worked on. And like I said, she took that part very seriously. And the obstacle course that she ran in the beginning of the movie, she did that herself. She originally had said she would get her double to do it. And I said, hey, you're younger than I am and you're in good shape. Why can't you do it? That way, when you're sweating and looking not so great at the end of it, that's really you.
Yeah. So she agreed to do it.
Yeah, and she did do that. Yeah.
Not all the people who came down there were as fun to work with. So Demi Moore at one point came down. I guess she was also prepping for a role. I don't know for what movie.
Well, the movie never came to fruition, but it was a movie that she was hoping to make and would be the protagonist in it. So yeah, she wanted to see what, same thing. What is profiling like? How are you in the room? And those sorts of things. But she didn't seem nearly as interested in the role, nor as prepared.
I think at one point you told a story in the book about her you were with her and then she just hands you the phone and it's Bruce Willis. Tell us that story.
Well, yes. So she got a little bored with one of the consultations. It was a triple homicide case. And she said, well, I'm going to go back to my room. Well, my job, nobody, unless you're an agent, nobody can be unescorted and just walk around at the academy. So I had to go with her, right? So I'm running after her and she starts talking on her cell phone. I don't know who she's talking to initially. So we get to her room and she throws me the phone and says, here, talk to Bruce. I'm gonna be indisposed for a few minutes. Oh, it was like, I'm like, oh, hi, I'm Jana Monroe. And it was, I had to think quickly on that.
Right.
I'm like, oh, I'm talking to Bruce Willis. He was very nice.
So, I mean, was the FBI cool? I mean, obviously they were pretty cool with Hollywood coming down. And like you said in your book, it wasn't always the most flattering portrait of the FBI, but they seemed to be okay with it.
Well, and yes, at the time. And quite frankly, I think that was naivete on the part of the FBI, because after Silence of the Lambs, won the Academy Award and Jodie Foster did, there was so much media attention that it's like FBI headquarters woke up. And I remember them calling John Douglas and going, what are you people doing down there? And now you flooded our PIO, public information officer. So they had a person, but they promoted a woman to come down. She spent full time with us for, like 2 years, handling all of the media calls. I think the FBI totally underestimated how much attention that would get.
Yeah.
So they did curtail authors. Thomas Harris, the author of Silence of the Lambs and Red Dragon, he had a lot of access to Quantico, as did a few other authors. And that was curtailed after the success of the movie.
After that, did you see a sudden flood of interest in people then suddenly wanting to be in the FBI? Like, were there suddenly a lot more women applying for your job?
Yes, there were. And it was funny. It was, an unintended great recruitment tool. But everybody, all the women then wanted to just join and get into the behavioral science unit. It's like, oh, no. There's a process that you don't just, come in and do that as a brand new agent. The other program was the X-Files. Did you ever see the X-Files?
Oh, yeah. Big fan. Yep.
So they all came down, Duchovny and Gillian Anderson, they all came down at one point and we were taking and shooting and whatnot. I hadn't even watched the show. It had been on for like 2 seasons. So I had to quickly catch up. I watched a few. Then I thought I'd go out and I was doing some presentations to college people. They all wanted to join that squad. And I'm going, hey, it's not real. We don't do aliens.
I was going to ask, is there a paranormal? There isn't. That is completely a figment of Hollywood's imagination, right?
Yeah, it's a great show, but I couldn't believe these people, 18, 19, 21, they all wanted to join that squad. And I'm like, no, there's no such thing.
But you definitely had access to secrets, right? That other people in the world didn't know, maybe, I would imagine.
Yes, and especially as I moved up the ranks in the FBI, starting the cyber division after 9/11. You have to have your TSCI, top secret clearance for a lot of that information. And then as special agent in charge of the Los Angeles office and then Phoenix, I had access to a lot of secret information.
Do you have members of the press hounding you, trying to kind of get you to leak things? Does that happen? Is that part of your job?
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. Interesting. So, okay. Why did you write this book? Because you've had this story for a long time in your life, and you decided to write a book about it. And again, like we just talked about, some of this stuff is top secret, and so you can't reveal it. But why did you decide to put your story out there in the world?
Okay, there's several reasons. And the reason I did it now, you're right, I could have done this like 16 years ago.
Yeah.
My colleague and friend, Joe Navarro, who graciously wrote the foreword to my book, would call me every year and go, when are you going to write your book? When are you going to write your book? I saw that there was still an interest in this subject matter, behavioral science specifically, but also into law enforcement. And I thought, I don't need a consultant or an advisor. I have all this from memory. I have my notes. I'm a copious note taker. That's how I learn. And I always did feel, and I'm going to use the word feel, this sense of great sadness for the victims, the too many victims of violent crime and the loved ones who grieve their loss, because it's not just the victim, it's their family members, spouses, everybody that loved them and cared for them. And I wanted to pay tribute to them the best I could by helping tell their story. And then another reason was my hope is I really would like to encourage, and I can use this word, inspire young people, specifically women, but young men and women, to take whatever they're pursuing in life, right? A career, a job, and a personal life, to take it to the next step, that they can do that, to encourage them and show that people coming from meager beginnings can accomplish what you want if you're willing to put the work through and the work in to do it.
Do you think the FBI has a bit of a PR problem right now? I mean, to me, it's kind of sad what's happening, because I know and not to get too political here, but we're very polarized, right? And it seems like there's a certain faction of our population in America that really doesn't trust institutions like the FBI anymore. Does that concern you?
Yeah. Let me just tell you, it breaks my heart. It breaks my heart. And I think it goes a little deeper than just a PR issue. And you're right. It's not good to get onto a political platform. And that was the thing when and I say we, my husband Dale and I were in the FBI, you were not allowed to even discuss politics. We worked with people for years that we were friends with. We have no idea how they voted or what they were, because it was not a part of our world, because we did not want to color anything that would bias investigations.
And so do you think that's been a problem, that it has become a little bit more political than it used to be?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think anytime when you bring a political optic into something, it's going to create a bias. And I had to work diligently, as did my colleagues, to leave your bias at the door. If you're truly trying to find out what somebody did, why they did it, how they did it, your bias and your judgment is not, and that's hard as a human being. But when it's like anything, if you practice, it becomes easier. So you bring politics into it, and I think it throws those things out the window.
When did you retire from the FBI?
2006.
Wow.
Yeah, I've been in corporate.
Yeah. So what is that? What is a post FBI, like? What do you do now?
Well, just briefly, I went to work for KPMG and started their forensic investigation practice. Then I worked for two large companies as their chief security officer, one an electric utility with a nuclear plant that was had already been around for like 100 years. So I made some updates and changes. The next one was for a nutrition company that had zero security, but was in 96 countries. So the idea of building a security program was very exciting to me, to build a team and a program that suited their needs. And I left that, wrote the book, and now I'm consulting on some TV shows and movies.
Oh, wow.
And I'm still working part-time for a security company in cybersecurity.
So your job as a consultant is both cyber and, I don't know what you would call, like, is it like physical security, like figuring out when you do security for a big corporation, what does that mean?
So and you start with an assessment, right? First, what is the industry? What are you trying to protect? Is it IP? Is it intellectual property because you're making things? Or, so whatever it is. And then build a program around that. So you need physical security, you need cameras, you need, how are you going to get into a building? You protect that. Is it going to be fingerprint? Is it an old badge system? Whatever suits them. And then when you're in other countries, that becomes far more complicated because you have to integrate that with some of the countries' laws and the types of things that they have. So it's very different, something in Singapore versus Russia versus Mexico. But have all of that tied back to corporate and somehow have one system that has business continuity. So the pandemic was perfect, right? That was one of the things you'd exercise. So what if we had a big pandemic? How would we keep our doors open? Same thing. If you have a hurricane, your building burns down, a flood, you have active shooter come in. So you take all of those things and have contingency plans for them.
Does anybody ever, in the movie version of your life, somebody calls you out of retirement to come and help solve a case? Has that happened?
Yes. And actually, I need to respond to an email I got this morning.
Oh my God. Listen, I better get off.
No.
you got to solve a crime. Talking to me.
Yeah, I haven't responded to the email yet. So yes, it does, which is flattering.
Yeah, that's terrific. All right. The book is called Hearts of Darkness, Serial Killers, the Behavioral Science Unit, and My Life as a Woman in the FBI. Jana Monroe, this has been fascinating. Thank you so much for joining the podcast today.
Oh, Jonathan, thank you so much for having me. It's been my pleasure, and I've really been looking forward to this.
Thank you for listening to Right About Now, hosted by my dad, Jonathan Small. If you like what you heard, there are a few ways you can help support the show. First, please leave a rating and review wherever you may listen to this podcast. This really helps others find Right About Now. You can also head over to patreon.com/rightaboutnowpodcast to make a donation. Finally, subscribe to the Right About Now newsletter called Small Talk on substack.com. This is Ella, encouraging you all to do the right thing. Thing.